Aida Levitan.
Artes Miami, you write for Nuevo Herald. You're on several boards, including former PAM trustee, Faith, Cuban Heritage Collection, Amigos. How do you find time to do everything?
Well, let me add U.S. Century Bank because that's a very important board that I'm on and that I'm very proud of. It's organization. I learned to be very organized very early in life. I had a wonderful teacher by the name of Miss Jane Powers, Miss Penny Powers, who, by the way, was one of the main organizers of Operation Pedro Pan, a British lady. And she taught us how to outline, this was in the 7th grade, and how to organize things. And I think that's the key to a lot of the things that I've been able to accomplish in life.
Your life is so full professionally. How do you find time for the personals, the free time? Like what's the eye that I'm gonna lay back and relax? What does that look like?
It's very difficult to find time for myself, and more I'm finding that I am insisting on finding time for myself, for my husband, Fernando Petit, for my son, Alex Fumero, for my new grandchild, Desi Fumero, and that's more important to me than anything else. But I also find time to relax. For example, every night I watch some kind of series that I enjoy. In the afternoon, I read the Miami Herald and El Nuevo Herald. That's something that I love doing. And then at night, I always read a book that enables me to escape, usually into another time and into another kind of life. And reading, I think, has been my mental health tool throughout the years. I've been reading voraciously from the time I was a little girl. I loved reading cuentos de hadas, fairy tales. My godfather, Roberto Díaz de Villegas, who was a poet, understood that I liked books. He was probably the only person in my family who understood this. And he was always sending me these wonderful Hans Christian Andersen and all the legendary fairy tales. He would send me these wonderful books, and later he would send me Little Women, and he would send me La Edad de Oro de José Martí. And because of that, my love for reading started when I was a child.
Where were you born?
I was born in Havana, Cuba, and this was back in the late 1940s, so I'm revealing my age. I'm not going to say exactly when. And it was a wonderful time to be Cuban. I was able to spend a really fantastic childhood in Havana.
Tell me a little bit about your family lineage. Where did your family come from? When did they arrive in Cuba?
It's a very interesting combination. It's almost a preparation for what came after in Miami. My grandfather, Julio del Castillo, was a criollo. He was born in Cuba. My grandmother, Josefina Cañizares Forns, was also born in Cuba, of Catalan extraction and Castilian extraction. My grandfather was of Castilian extraction. He was a senator. Back in the 1920s, if you look at the book that Cuba, the Republic, published in 1925, you will see Congressman Julio del Castillo during the first Zayas administration. And he was originally a pharmacist in Moron, in Camagüey, and he was so popular that he was asked to run for Congress, and he won. And then he became a businessman. He owned sugar mills, was a very brilliant man, and loved to live very well. That living well communicated to my mother, Aida del Castillo, and he took her on trips on the Queen Mary to Europe. He had her study as an intern, sort of the last part of her education in Switzerland. My uncle, Julio del Castillo, became a diplomat. He was a consul of Cuba in Prague in 1938. What a historic year to be a consul in Prague. And he was also a consul in London at the very beginning of the revolution. So that was a very distinguished part of my family that became quite rich and then lost it all during the Depression. On the father's side, my father was a doctor, as many members of his family were. Actually, out of 10 children, I believe that there were 8 doctors. My father and I were somewhat estranged. He and my mother got a divorce when I was 2 years old, and he wasn't very close to me. But my aunt, who was the last of the family, the youngest, she became a psychiatrist, Violeta Tomas, told me a lot about the family. This was a family that in the early 20th century escaped the Ottoman Empire. They lived in Jerusalem and they escaped the Ottoman Empire and came to Cuba to find freedom and to find a new life. There were 10 children in the family. The mother apparently was an excellent mother and really dedicated to the education of the children. So as I said, 8 of them became physicians. And very smart people, extremely smart people. My father was brilliant. He was an ophthalmologist and an eye surgeon, practiced in Milledgeville, Georgia, and then in Atlanta, Georgia, after he became an exile. So it's a very interesting mixture of cultures that I was exposed to and that helped me prepare for multiculturalism here in the United States.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your early memories of Cuba. What memories of Cuba you have in general from your childhood?
One of the early memories, which is kind of interesting, when I was 5 years old, my aunt, Amparo Díaz de Villegas, really believed in me. And she was a kindergarten teacher in a countryside town called Managua, very near Havana. I think it was like an hour and a half away. And she decided when I was 5 that she was going to take me to the kindergarten to meet the 3 and 4-year-old kids who were in her class. And she allowed me to, to teach a class, which is very funny to me that she allowed that. I mean, I could have been a mess. But I actually taught the class, and I actually was a leader of the little children that day. And my aunt told me that she could not believe it. She was so proud of me. And I told her, I have no idea where this came from, that I was going to be a doctor in philosophy, which is very strange because I actually have a PhD, which is a doctorate in philosophy. That was one of my earliest memories, a wonderful memory. And I remember that because my aunt was a kindergarten teacher, she had access to a lot of kind of unique things. Like, for example, during Easter, they brought these gigantic cartons that were bunnies and eggs. And we had an Easter egg party with these gigantic figures, and it was the most fun that I ever had when I was a little child. I'm talking about maybe I was 6 or 5 at this time. The other thing that I remember, of course, is the love that they gave me. They were incredibly loving people in my family. Everybody was wonderful to my brother and to me, but at the same time, they were disciplined. Like, we could not go to bed late. For example, we were in bed by 8 p.m. every night. They would allow us to listen to the radio, Los Tres Villalobos, which was a popular radio program at the time. There was another program called Rafles, which was sort of like a detective story. And I think that's where my love for detective and suspense stories started, by listening to these stories. We were also allowed to, watch television. Cuba was very advanced. Cuba had color television before the United States as a test run. And we were allowed to see some really good movies. My mother would take us to the, I think it was called the Cameo Theater, or maybe the Rex. The Rex is where near the Foxa or in the Foxa building. They screened movies that were for children. So every children's Disney type of movie we saw. And after the movies, we would go to have these wonderful dinners at these terrific places that my mother and my aunt took me to, and my brother. And my love for food also started then. And of course, I wasn't watching my diet at that time, so I did become a little chubby. So by the time of 9, I was a little bit too chubby, and I was not very good at sports. And that was one of the main frustrations that I suffered in Cuba, because children were not very kind to other children who were not good in sports. So that was, my childhood was really wonderful because I had a tremendous mother and a tremendous godmother and godfather. And at the same time, we traveled quite a bit. We went to Mexico. We went to New York for Christmas every year because my godfather, Roberto Díaz de Villegas, was a consul there. And in New York, we had the most incredible times. We always went to see the Radio City Music Hall show, the Christmas show. And on the 31st of December, at that time, my uncle lived near Times Square. So we would go into Times Square and watch, the New Year's Eve celebration from Times Square. It was probably not as crowded as it is today, but I do remember that it was very crowded. And those were terrific memories. We were not rich, we were middle class, but my mother was able to always economize and live well and enabled us to enjoy life.
And then you leave Cuba. So I wanna jump us to Pedro Pan. Can you tell me about Operation Pedro Pan and what you remember from when you left Cuba?
Well, first I remember the year before I left, 1960. I left in 61. And in 1960, my mother, by the way, when we were in New York, when Fidel Castro came to power, and we heard the news, my cousin, who was a neurosurgeon and very smart and very anti-Batista, was incredibly happy. And he told my mother, oh, this is going to be wonderful for Cuba, this revolution and Fidel Castro. And my mother said to him, Julito, don't you remember that Fidel Castro was a gangster in the University of Havana? I don't think he's going to be good for Cuba. And boy, was she a visionary. And my mother knew about communism. She had read a lot about Hungary and what the Soviets did in Hungary in 1956, I believe it was. And the moment she heard Castro declare himself a communist, she knew that we had to get out of Cuba. And at that time, Operation Pedro Pan started with Ramon Grau, Mr. Baker, who was the director of the Ruston Academy. We went to the Phillips School. These were bilingual schools, English and Spanish, in Cuba. And as I said, Miss Penny Powers, who was my teacher, had been in charge of the Kinder, I forget the German word, but there was a Kinder program in Germany in 1938 to get Jewish children out of Germany. And she was one of the main coordinators of that program. So between them, they enabled 14,000 children to leave Cuba with special visas, unaccompanied, because many of the parents had not received any kind of visas or permits. My mother had applied for an exit visa, but she had not received it. My brother had not received it. I had received it under Operation Pedro Pan, and I was the first one to leave alone. I was 13 years old. I looked older. I looked like I was 15. And, they dressed me up very nicely. I had these they didn't give me the diamond earrings that my grandmother had left me because they guessed that my earrings would be taken away. And sure enough, my mother was again visionary because in the, that that area of the airport where they separate you from the families that was surrounded by glass. They took my old gold earrings, which were not very valuable, but I really resented the fact that they did that. They put me on the plane. I don't remember a thing about that plane ride. It was like I blocked it out completely. And when I got to the United States, I was very lucky because my mother's best friend, Hilda Pasos, who had a daughter who was my friend, Hildita, my same age, she was there to receive me. And she took me home to her home because she had become an exile before my family. And I was able to stay with them until 30 days later. I was so lucky. My mother and my brother were given the permit to leave, and we were reunited. But I do sympathize with the many children who were separated from their parents for many years, because every single day that I was in Hilda Pasos' home, even though she was very kind to me, I was crying every single night because I had never been away from my family and from my mother. And it was a horrible experience for me to be separated from them. So I don't know what would have happened to me if my mother hadn't come in 30 days later. And the funny thing is that the first thing Hilda told me is that everybody has to pull their weight in this household. And your job is going to be to wash the dishes every night for the entire family. And I said, me wash dishes? I thought that was the most horrible thing in the world because I had never done a bit of housework. And I was not, by the way, I've never been very good in housework. And I was not very good in housework then, especially. So that was very humiliating for me to have to wash dishes. And like I said, I was incredibly lucky that I was able to live with my mother 30 days later.
Right, 15.
Thank you. So, what were some of I'd love to know what were some of the bigger challenges you faced upon arriving in the United States, and how and what did your family do, and challenges that they faced when you all arrived in the United States?
Well, the challenges most of the exile community face is that we were very poor. We had no economic support except the refugee center. The refugee center, which was centered in Freedom Tower, what is known as Freedom Towers today, gave us, I think with my family, which were 3 people, they gave us $100 a month. They gave us Spam, a block of cheese, lard, different kinds of food from the army. I think these came from the army. Some clothing and so on, because we had nothing. We were not allowed to bring anything from Cuba, and definitely not money. So the poverty that all of a sudden we face was quite a shock. My mother was a very proud woman, as most of the Cuban exiles were, and she did not want to be subsidized by the American government. So because of the fact that she had a very good education, and she was also a secretary in Cuba for a law firm, she was able to find a job 6 months after coming here that could sustain us, that could maintain the family at a very basic level. So, but everybody, again, had to pull their weight. The family required that everyone who was in the family had to work, even the children. At the age of 15, I had to find a job as a secretary and tell them that I was 16. I also had to serve tea in my school later in Miami Beach High School because I didn't have $1 to pay for the lunch. That was pretty humiliating to me because all of the children were looking at me serving tea. But then my mother told me nothing in life that involves decent work is humiliating. And you should always be proud to work and to earn your living. So after that, it didn't bother me anymore. But the challenge was quite quite a tremendous thing because we went from a middle class, upper middle class life to being basically the poorest kids in the school. We also had to deal with prejudice. I remember that, and people don't know this, they think the Cubans were very privileged and we were rich when we came and we were all very well connected socially and that we didn't have to do anything. That's not true. For example, I remember my mother moved us to Miami Beach. The reason for that is that in my school, in my first school, the junior high school called Aida Levitan, this was the time of West Side Story, of gangs. And one of the gang members in that school killed a 14-year-old child. It was so dangerous that my mother, became very alarmed by this situation. And she moved us to Miami Beach, which was full of elderly people who would not, be menacing in any way. And it was a very tranquil type of atmosphere, only a block and a half from the beach, in a building that dated back to the 1920s and was falling apart, but we were so happy to be in a safe place. But I remember that I was sitting in the back of that building in these stairs that were almost falling, wooden stairs, and I was speaking loudly with my brother. And we were very tanned by the sun because we would go to the beach every day after school. This was before we were working. We were 14 and 13 at the time. And an elderly person came out and said, "You are N, the N word, and you are also Spix." And we were insulted, but we didn't know what they were saying. And we went to my mother and we said, "These people have called us these names. What is this?" And my mother said, "Don't pay attention to prejudiced people. They're stupid, they're ignorant, and you know who you are, and you don't have to worry. You know your value." And again, this was typical of some of the prejudice that we had to encounter.
What helped you overcome these prejudices and these challenges in a new country?
I think Cubans in general have a very high opinion of themselves. Whether we're right or wrong, we really believe in ourselves. We are, especially this first wave that came, these first waves that came in the 1960s, many of them came from middle-class families with education, with professions, with entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that was very important because we created the basis, the foundation for future waves to be able to also succeed in many ways. We really believed to such an extent that sometimes we committed the sin of hubris, of thinking that we were better than other people. Not that we were going to discriminate other people, but we felt that we could do things that other people weren't capable of doing. We had a theory which was called resolver, to resolve. When faced with a problem, when faced with a difficult situation, you don't give up. You find a way to resolve the situation. You find a way to succeed. And I think that's the key to my own personal success and the success of the millions of Cubans who have become exiles, not only in the United States, but in the world.
And to talk a little bit about that success, for you it starts academically. You're someone who goes, not everyone gets to, but you're someone who goes to university. Did you go to Emory after high school? Can you talk to us about
No.
your post-secondary education?
First of all, remember that my grandfather was so believing in education that he sent my mother to Switzerland to study. He sent her to a bilingual school in the 1920s called the Cathedral School in Cuba. So that tradition of believing in education came down with my mother as well. And my mother took us to Miami Beach because Miami Beach High School was a very good and safe environment full of kids from upper middle class Jewish families, and the education was excellent. I went to my high school counselor, Mr. Jack Ruby, I never forget that, and I said to him, I have very good grades, basically A's and 2B's, and I want to go to college. And he says, well, why don't you be a secretary? You'd be, your family's in need. You'd immediately be able to earn money. I typed 90 words a minute, so he believed that I could really find an excellent job for myself. And I said to him, no, Mr. Ruby, find me a scholarship because I've been admitted to the University of Miami and to Rollins College, and I want to stay in Miami. I want to go to the University of Miami. And he found me a scholarship with Chase Bank, I'll never forget, and that was my first scholarship at the University of Miami. Every year, Dean Bronson would help me get scholarships so I could continue my studies. I had excellent grades, basically 3.8 average, which was basically A's, and the B's were usually related to mathematics and science. That was not my strong point. And I was so happy at the University of Miami. I had a blast there. I taught the football players how to read because many of them could not read properly. And that was one of the most fun jobs I had at the University of Miami. And I started belonging to organizations like Mortarboard and so on. So again, it prepared me for community activism. And when I finished college, I got married. And again, I went through this whole thing. We moved to Atlanta because my ex-husband, Paul Levitan, was studying dentistry at Emory University. And I went to the Dean of Comparative Literature at Emory University, and I said, I would like to continue studying literature. Would you please help me find a scholarship? I have very good grades, and I really think I deserve it, and so on. He said to me, no, because you're married. And most married students who come in here, the women get pregnant and then they leave and the scholarship was wasted. Of course, these were different times. I'm talking about 1969. And I was very frustrated. I worked for a year. I worked in 2 different jobs, one of them WAGA TV5, which prepared me for my public relations career. And then I went to Dean Bronson again. This woman was one of my great mentors and help. And I said to her, I want to go for my PhD. I've been admitted into the PhD program of Emory to study Spanish literature at a very advanced level, of course. And Dean Bronson got me an Alpha Lambda Delta scholarship. And after that, I was able to get assistantships and scholarships so that I could continue at Emory and get my PhD. So, those have been the blocks in my path, but I have never given up, and I have found the people who can help me achieve my goals.
Now you have a PhD at this point. And you're in Atlanta. What brings you back to Miami, and when?
Well, at that time, my ex-husband and I were convinced that we didn't want to live in Atlanta. We loved the city, but we loved Miami better. And our families were here. So we came back to Miami. I wrote my PhD dissertation during the Watergate hearings. So whenever I got tired of writing, I would go listen to see the Watergate hearings on television. And at the same time, I was working assistant part-time teaching jobs. And I was able to finish the dissertation. My first job was with the famous Eduardo Padron, who was then, I think, a dean at Miami-Dade College. We were teaching, Miami-Dade College didn't have a building then. We had to teach in different churches around where Miami-Dade College is located now. And I taught English as a second language, and I also taught Spanish as a foreign language. And those were my first jobs. Then I got a really crazy job, which was something called Operation Buen Vecino at the Miami Police Department. At that time, police officers were basically Anglos and a few African Americans. And they were arresting Cubans at coffee shops and on the street because they were yelling and talking to each other with hands like this, and they thought they were fighting. And this caused a lot of problems in the police department because these were absurd arrests. So somebody thought, let's apply for a grant, a federal grant, to teach police officers about Cuban culture and to teach them some basic words in Spanish so they could deal with these hundreds of thousands of Cubans who had come to Miami. And this was back in, I believe this was a program of 1973, more or less. And I got a job doing that. It was really fun because the police officers have a great sense of humor. So teaching them was quite a challenge, but very funny. And after that, they got another federal grant to allow candidates for the police department who were minorities, Cuban, Latins, and African Americans, to go through a training program so they could pass the University of Chicago exam, which was extremely difficult. And I elevated their reading skills from, let's say, a 6th grade or even a 5th grade level to a higher level so they could pass this exam. And that was also a very interesting program, and it prepared me for other jobs. After that, I became an assistant academic dean for Latin Affairs at Biscayne College with Dr. Antonio Jorge, a very famous economist who had been a vice minister at the beginning of the revolution and had left in protest of the Communist Party and the communist regime. And it was a fascinating job that again prepared me for the next job, which was sort of my big coming out party, Director of Latin Affairs of Metro-Dade County government.
So, take a sip of water. So you use,
Thank you.
We're at 30 now.
We're at 30.
Yeah.
Good. Oh no, we're doing good timing then.
Sounds good. I know. You got all these tricks up your sleeve. I didn't know.
So let's pick up exactly. Jump over a little bit. So let's pick up exactly there. Your job at the county, Director of Latin Affairs. Tell
Right.
me about this job, how you got it, and what did it entail.
This was a dream job. At that time, that office was very large and had a lot of responsibility. It was such a dream job that 250 people applied for it. And I thought it was almost impossible to get it. But I moved the earth to try to get into the position of finalists. And what I did is I studied county government deeply through publications of the League of Women Voters, which was, I'll eternally be grateful to the League because they allowed me to learn sort of information about how county government worked. At the same time, I knew that it was also going to be a game of influences. So I was able to move some friends of mine to talk to Luis Sabines, the president of the Miami, the Hispanic Chamber at the time, that the Cubans had founded, very influential man, very influential group, and to tell him about my qualifications and that I was very qualified for this job, so that he would not find me an unknown. So through these various recommendations that I was able to gather, as well as my track record as assistant academic dean of Biscayne College, I was able to make it to the finals. They had an interview panel that included Merit Stierheim, Tony Ojeda, I believe Sergio Pereira, Luis Sabines happened to be in the panel too, and a couple of other people. And because I had studied so hard about county government, I was really prepared for some of the very difficult questions that they asked during the interview. I was probably better prepared than anyone. And Merit Stierheim, I think it was Dewey Knight, who was also on the panel, a wonderful administrator who was assistant county manager. And because of that, the vote was very close, but they voted for me, and I became director of Latin Affairs of an office that within months of my becoming director had 100 employees. because of the CETA program allowed me to go from about 30 or 20 employees, I think originally, to 100 employees that were in all kinds of departments to help people, to inform people, to go on television, radio, and newspapers, magazines to talk about county government and explain to people how to abide by the law, how to use the services. And also, I became director of the Hispanic Heritage Week celebration, which was part of my responsibility. And that put me again in the forefront of media constantly. And I expanded that week into a festival that lasted a whole month and was able to raise $300,000 for the festival, restructured the board. It was a fascinating job. I really enjoyed it.
And this is at a time when the Hispanic community in Miami is growing significantly, and the need exists. Can you contextualize that a little bit?
It was growing tremendously because not only had we had the original Exodus on the early 60s, we also had the freedom flights that brought hundreds of thousands of people in total to Miami. So the Cuban American community was very important. And by the way, there was also an important segment, the Puerto Rican community. And the first press conference that Merritt Steerheim did with me that was full of media. I couldn't believe that they gave so much attention to this office. There was one particular individual, two particular individuals who were leaders in the Puerto Rican community. One was Emilio Lopez and the other one was Jose Mendez. And Emilio Lopez stood up and said, "This is not the Office of Latin Affairs, this is the Office of Cuban Affairs." And it was very funny because it was meant to be a criticism of Merritt Steerheim and his administration because he thought that the concentration was on Cubans because of the tremendous number of Cubans who had come to Miami. Well, the next day, I went to visit Emilio Lopez and Jose Mendez at Borinquen Clinic. Emilio was the founder of Borinquen Clinic. And I said to him, "I'm here to demonstrate to you that I'm going to listen to you, to your needs, and try to help you in every way that I can." From then on, one of my biggest allies in county government was Emilio Lopez, and the second ally was Jose Mendez. May they rest in peace. They did a lot of good for their Puerto Rican community. And one of the interesting things that happened is that in 1980, I was still director, and we were told that there were 10,000 people who had, out of desperation, invaded the Peruvian embassy in Havana. And we had a meeting with Tony Ojeda, Silvia Unzueta, a whole bunch of administrators in the county. And I said to them, you know, I have all these community organizations that I have activated for the Hispanic Heritage Week and for the office. Why don't we create a coordinating group called Reenlace? Reconnect is the meaning of Reenlace. And we have them ready as a volunteer group, so when the 10,000 arrive, they can bring volunteers to help these people and process these people. Little did we know that only a bit later, we were going to get 125,000 Mariel refugees. And we had to open Tamiami Park and work almost 24 hours a day with Reenlace as volunteers and with county administrators and workers to process thousands and thousands of Mariel refugees. And I was very proud to coordinate that volunteer effort, and that was one of the, I would say, the most important contribution that I made to my community and to the newly arrived refugees as Director of Latin Affairs of Metro-Dade.
Until what time were you, until what year were you at the county?
It was 1980, precisely at the Tamiami Park, that I was approached by Cesar Odio, Assistant City of Miami Manager, and he said, "I've seen the way you work, and I know Joe Grassi, the city manager, knows you and admires you very much." I actually knew Joe Grassi socially and his wife, And I would like to offer you the City of Miami Information and Visitors job, the director. And boy, that was again a tremendous opportunity because I was the woman who earned the least salary, the least, the lowest salary in county government was my salary. And immediately my salary became more than double. And Maurice Ferre was the most visionary and charismatic mayor in Miami. I loved Mayor Steve Clark in the county, but boy, Maurice Ferre had a vision of what Miami would become that was fascinating. So I would be helping Maurice Ferre promote the city of Miami as a center for international business and finance. Well, because of the Mariel influx and that a tiny, and I say tiny percentage, maybe 5% of that group was criminal because Fidel Castro insisted on putting criminals on the votes with regular people, and another 5% was mentally ill. So, let's say that 10% of that population was a problematic population. The rest were very law-abiding, decent people. That group caused problems in city streets. There was crime that increased. There were all kinds of problems also with drugs. At that time, there were drug lords in Miami. There were shootings, cocaine cowboys. It was a pretty difficult year, 1980 to 1985. And what we did is, I was told my major responsibility was to promote the city and also to inform citizens of the services of the city of Miami. So what I decided was, okay, so we have a very bad reputation. Time magazine has put us on the cover as Paradise Lost. So we're not going to be able to tell the media internationally that we're the most wonderful city in the world and not tell them the truth about Miami. So the truth was more complex than just the negative, and it was more complex than just the positive. So I took advantage of the negative publicity and I wrote to editors, not reporters, editors of major newspapers. And I said, we're going to do a tour for a small group of journalists, all editors of major newspapers throughout the world, and we're going to show you the good, the bad, and the ugly. You're going to go into Little Havana, where shootings have taken place. We're going to go into Liberty City, where the riots have taken place. But you're also going to go to the Miami Free Zone. You're also going to go to international banks. You're also going to go to the Port of Miami, and you're going to see the entire community, not just one part. Well, they loved it. And within 3 years, we had done 3 tours a year, each with 20 to 30 journalists or editors. That included even the BBC. They did Passport from Miami as part of this program. And as a result of these tours, we generated within a few years $6 million in positive publicity. And my first account as an agency was the city of Miami.
So you're at the city. You're leading these efforts to kind of bring the spotlight and present an unvarnished view of the city, good, bad, and ugly. And at one point you say, I should be doing this for myself. I should be doing this for myself. When did that entrepreneurial spirit kick in and say, I need to start my own business?
Well, looking back at myself within these huge organizations, I see that I was an entrepreneur even then, and that some of the trouble that I ran into with certain people within the organizations who criticized me or conspired against me, told my bosses that I was a lot of trouble, and the reasons they got upset with me is because I created work for them. I created a lot of work with these initiatives. And they saw me as a pain in the butt. So I decided that the time had come in 1983 for me to look elsewhere for work. So I was able to get Maurice Ferré on the board on the belief that I could do this journalist tours just as well as an agency, as a PR agency, and that it would actually do him a lot of good in terms of the budget because he would have to pay me only about half of what he was paying me as a director. And in addition to that, I was able to talk to Mayor Steve Clark, who I had a wonderful relationship with, and sell him and Merritt Steerheim on the idea of allowing me to coordinate the Sister Cities program for the county. And again, that would cut their costs because they didn't have to pay me as much as they would have to pay a bureaucrat to do this. So those were my two first accounts as Aida Levitan and Associates back in 1983. And then in 1986, I met Fausto Sanchez, who was an advertising and broadcast production expert, and we founded Sanchez and Levitan.
And Sanchez and Levitan, one I find just remarkable how at every turn you level up. To use a very present day expression, every turn is leveling up and using the relationships and experiences kind of go one level forward. Sanchez and Levitan, obviously now, if you know about Hispanic marketing, is one of the firms that everybody has to learn because it's you started something that became a powerhouse. Tell me a little bit about Sanchez and Levitan from that start with Fausto and what it goes on to become.
Well, I must commend Fausto because he had a vision that the agency would do much better if we offered a whole package, not just PR, but also events, advertising, to make it what is now called a marketing communications agency. And that was not the view at the time. Zuby Advertising, which was a powerhouse at the time, the number one agency at the time with the Miami Herald as a client, was basically an advertising firm at the beginning. And Ana Maria Fernandez Har, another woman, had IAC Advertising, again, an advertising firm. Later on, they saw our example and they added more PR to what they did. Because Fausto was so good in creative and I was so good in public relations and events, people started trusting us with their accounts. And we won national Addies, we won local Addies, we won the Beverage World Ethnic Advertising Award. We won many, many different awards with the creative, and then we won the Multicultural Excellence Award with Public Relations Society of America. When these awards were publicized, and I always did a very good job of publicizing them, we started getting national clients. For example, we got Seagram accounts, Chivas Regal, Crown Royal, Absolute Vodka, very visible. We had Coca-Cola, PR and events accounts. We had Coors Brewing Company, which was a terrific account, a lot of fun. We had, of course, the City of Miami and Metro-Dade. We then got TJ Maxx and Marshalls. We had Bell South. That was a big win that Fausto brought in through a competitive process of a request for proposal and then interviews and so on. Bell South was a giant. That was advertising all the time. Then we won the Florida Lottery, again, a competitive process, and that was an incredibly creative account, lots of fun, and very hard work. And then we did some crazy things. That was my fault and drove the agency crazy. We did the Fair of Seville in Miami, which was covered by every TV station that you can imagine. Brought in our clients into the fair. We did that for 2 years. And then in 1997, we did the Fair of Spain, and over a period of 4 days, 40,000 people came to the fair, and all of our clients were involved. And it cost us a lot of money in terms of time to coordinate these huge events, but it was very helpful to the agency image. And back in 1992, we also did something that was wonderful. Andy Garcia was a good friend of Fausto Sanchez, and he asked us to, free of charge, produce a concert for him with Cachao and his orchestra. Cachao was an elderly man already, but he had created the first mambo in Cuba in 1938, and he had created the Cuban Jam Session. Emilio Estefan told me, be careful because you're going to the night center, and Luis Enrique was there last week and only 300 people came to his show. And I said to Emilio, Emilio, you obviously don't know me. We're gonna fill this place up with Andy Garcia? Definitely. Even though people didn't know Cachao that well, Andy Garcia was the Godfather 3. And we knew that Andy Garcia was a big draw. We publicized it. We got free ads, we got sponsors, and we had, in the end, there was not one seat left in that show. And I think it was something like 4,000 people came to the Night Center auditorium to see that show. Again, Sanchez and Levitan got a lot of publicity out of that. So by being out there with community activities, with donations, with big events that we donated services for, we were able to attract a lot of attention, and our agency became one of the top 20 Hispanic agencies across the country with lots of national clients. And then came a new story for Sanchez and Levitan.
Before we get to that new chapter in Sanchez and Levitan, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what Hispanic advertising is at this time when you're starting.
We're at 1 p.m.
We're at 1 p.m. Okay. What is it? What is Hispanic advertising, right? Advertising had been mainstream, what we would call mainstream, right? The general population. And at some point somebody says, the population of Hispanics is growing, and they have a buying power, and they have political power, and they have dollars to spend, and you should get them as clients, and we can help you. Can you contextualize that and maybe the challenges that came with that for companies?
I think with the civic activism of people like Raúl Izaguirre of La Raza and Lulac and so on, the whole question of the growing Hispanic population became also a political issue. And Rudy de la Garza, a sociologist, helped the census refine the way they were asking questions of the Hispanic community so that people identify themselves as Hispanic as well as identifying their race, because Hispanic is not a race. There are many races within what is called Hispanic. At that time in the 1960s, visionary Cubans like Diaz Albertini, the Conil family, Rafael and Alicia Conil, later Castor, later Siboney Advertising with Jose Manuel Cubas, they created the first Hispanic advertising agencies in New York. And a man by the name of Ricardo Arregui created in 1962, at the same time as Diaz Albertini in New York, here in Miami, Arregui Advertising. And they started the ball rolling. And then came other agencies, including some Mexican-American agencies like Lopez Negrete and others in California. All these people showed national companies and local companies that they could achieve greater sales with the growing Hispanic market. Strategy Research Corporation with Dick Tobin, an Anglo of Jewish origin, was able to demonstrate with research not only that what the census had demonstrated, but to delve deeply into consumer patterns of the Hispanic community, first in Miami, and then he started studying other major Hispanic markets. Other visionaries like Herb Levin of Susquehanna Corporation demonstrated to his own corporate people how well he was doing here with WQBA and how much advertising he was getting in Spanish. So there was a whole group of people, Rene Anselmo with Spanish International Network in San Antonio, and a Cuban American who worked with him, Vivian Salazar Quevedo, who died very young, and she became station manager of Channel 23 and worked with Joaquin Blaya on creating Sábado Gigante and the Otis Festival. There were so many people who did a wonderful job of creating this conscience about Hispanic advertising that they helped us, the Hispanic advertising agencies, to grow and to demonstrate to clients how important it was for them to realize that Spanish language advertising and culturally relevant English language advertising was very important if they wanted to grow their brand in the most important growing market in the country.
And I'm sorry, did you say it's one or two?
Two. Say 1 hour, we're at 2.
Yeah. So Sanchez and Levitan, thank you for that context. I think that's important to show where Sanchez and Levitan comes in and how it grows so significantly. After many, many years, Sanchez and Levitan grow significantly, and it enters into as you described it, a new chapter. Can you talk to me about that?
I was reading Advertising Age and Adweek and realizing how many Hispanic and African American agencies were joining strategically with what we call general market agency, with gigantic holding companies. And I read in Advertising Age that Publicis had bought an African American agency. And I had been thinking about this strategic need for quite a while. This was in, I think it was in early 2000. And I said to Fausto, I think we should call these people in Publicis, this guy Bob Bloom, who was the chairman of Publicis USA at the time, and talk to him about creating a strategic alliance for Hispanic advertising with Publicis. Because if he bought an African-American agency, I know that the next thing they're gonna do is buy a Hispanic advertising agency or create some kind of an alliance with them. So I called him up, and the next day, Bob Bloom, who was very entrepreneurial, he had a guy coming into Sanchez and Levitan to see what we were all about. And within, I think, a month, they had already made us a proposal to actually buy us over a period of 3 years. And we became Publicis Sanchez and Levitan. They named me CEO, and Fausto and I were also co-chairman. And they also brought in 2 agencies that they bought from Siboney in Dallas and Los Angeles. And we became Publicis Sanchez and Levitan, a national agency. Later, they opened an agency in New York. So we had agencies all over the country. And they also facilitated our getting accounts such as L'Oreal, Lancome, and also it helped that we had a Dallas agency. We got the TXU account, Texas Utilities, and we had 15 brands of Nestle. Nestle was based in Glendale. So all over the country, we had different opportunities, and we became the number 8 Hispanic advertising agencies in the country. Then I saw that Publicis had bought Bromley. Bromley, in spite of its name, was owned by Ernesto Bromley, a Mexican-American, and he had founded that agency with Leonel Sosa many years ago, a Mexican-American. And they were in San Antonio. They were bigger than us. So I figured pretty soon they're gonna want Bromley to run us. And I advanced the idea to them of having a fusion Between Bromley and Publicis Sanchez and Levitan, I accepted that they would call it Bromley because they were bigger. I became president and vice chairman, and Ernesto became the chairman. And thus, we transformed our two agencies into the number one Hispanic advertising agency, not in our fantasy, but declared by Advertising Age in January 2004. And that was the year I left. I was president and vice chairman for a year, and then I decided that it was time for us to part ways and for me to be able to also enjoy life a little bit.
I want to be mindful of our time here. So give me just 1 second. There's so much to cover. One of the things that you experienced, that you talked about quite organically, kind of from the very beginning, is kind of societal expectations and the pushback you received. When you were in high school and you told your counselor you wanted to go to college, they said, "Why don't you become a secretary?" When you were at Emory and you said, "I want to go into a PhD program," they said, "No, women get pregnant." So it seems that at every step of your life, and I'm sure professionally, you talk in your career, you've dealt with some sort of sexism or misogyny, and the phrase "the glass ceiling" we use a lot. I wonder if you could talk about those challenges, being a woman, a Cuban American woman, in such male-dominated industries and world.
It causes a lot of anguish, and that really did at some times depress me terribly, that I had to constantly be dealing with this kind of prejudice, is all you can say, is prejudging someone and saying because she's a woman, she's not going to be able to do this. In fact, my latest job, when I was chairman of U.S. Century Bank, and also I'm a board director at U.S. Century Bank, one of my best friends said to me, "You're chairman of the board of a bank? What do you know about banking? What do you know about anything having to do with finance? These people must be crazy." And I said, "Yeah, but these people are also looking for businesses in the community to become their customers. And I have a feeling that I know a lot more owners of business than you do. And I have a feeling that I can also connect them with things that you cannot connect them with, opportunities. And also, I have a feeling that after supervising 100 employees and reading financial statements and being able to have a tremendous profit in my agency as CEO, I have a feeling that I know a lot about management that maybe you don't." So I was very upset with this individual who told me this. And this is the kind of thing that I have constantly had to face in my life. And I try to find refuge in other Hispanic women by creating the Coalition of Hispanic American Women back in the 1980s. Actually, it was created in 1978. And these women, who were all professional and entrepreneurial women, gave each other support and help in dealing with this kind of prejudice. And I promised myself when I became chairman of the board of U.S. Century Bank that the first thing I would try to do is to find a qualified woman to come into the board the moment there was an opening. And we did choose Maria Alonso, former president of United Way and now president of Northeastern University, to become a board director, and I'm very proud of that.
After Sanchez and Levitan and the various mergers, and you say, "All right, it's time to move on. I'm leaving on top, the number one agency." You go on to do a number of different things, and it's almost too many to go through because it's a very, very professionally and personally fulfilled life. So I want to touch upon just a few of the ones that I think are, I think people would be very interested in. And so one of those is that President Obama and Congress named you to the National American Latino Commission for the creation of what will eventually be the National American Latino Museum. Can you tell us about that uh, being named and what that meant?
That was a great honor, and I think I was named because of my interest in culture, my interest in museums. I've been a trustee at PAM for many years. I created Artes Miami, and a philanthropy that helps Hispanic artists and cultural organizations. So my mission there was to help create a museum that would inform and celebrate and tell the story of Latinos in the United States. And it was almost like an impossible dream. And I'm very proud that the commission was able to create a study that paved the way for the creation of the Smithsonian American Latino Museum, which is now an idea that has become a reality, and now they have to find a location on the National Mall where the museum will be built, and of course the fundraising has to take place.
Um, the Smithsonian is a good moment to kind of jump back because with your work at Sanchez and Levitan and because of your pioneering efforts, some of the some of the ads that you helped create are within the Smithsonian collection. Can you tell me about that?
The ad that was chosen by the Smithsonian was a part of a campaign called Voto Latino. And as creative director and creative team of that Fausto led, they created this print ad that ran all over the country for the Voto Latino campaign. And the Smithsonian thought it was fascinating and loved it and put it in their collection.
Um, art is very important to you, as you've mentioned, and Artes Miami is kind of a personal passion project that you've done across many years. Can you talk about maybe about Artes Miami specifically, but kind of about this broader sense of community involvement of do you see it as a responsibility? Talk to me about it.
We as Cubans have received so much from this country, starting with the most valuable thing, which is freedom and the ability to create opportunities for yourself through hard work, through education, and so on, that we have to give back. I think most Cuban Americans feel that way. Not only do we contribute to economic development by being very successful business leaders, but we really try to give back in different ways, in different civic endeavors, different philanthropies. I mean, the museum in Miami, the most important museum in Miami is called the Perez Art Museum Miami, and the money and collection that made it a reality came from a man named Jorge Perez, a Cuban exile. So I think that, I felt very strongly that I wanted to give back in an area that means a lot to me. I do have a PhD in Spanish literature. I love poetry. I love novels. Artes Miami has published the poetry of Hispanic authors here in Miami. I love art, and I personally have a collection, and I wanted to help artists promote their work. I want to help cultural organizations that produce, for example, concerts. Like recently, we supported Cecilia Valdez, the most important operetta that was created in Cuba, a zarzuela. 2,000 people came to see it. And we created the Artes Miami Film Fund and also sponsored the Spotlight on Cuba series within the Miami Film Festival. And for example, 2,000 people went to Los Frikis, one of the films shown within that Spotlight on Cuba series. And we will sponsor El Caso Padilla and many other documentaries in the Cuban cinema series at the Kubek Center. I have a passion for helping culture because I believe that without culture, the soul of a community is lost. And without art, life is not worth living. Without art, literature, philosophy, beauty, it's very important that we also cultivate the spirit and the intellect of the people who live in a community.
We talked about so many of your career as it built. I think it's always important for me to I want to ask everyone this question, and I'd love to know what do you consider professionally? What do you consider your biggest professional success, And what was your biggest professional failure?
My biggest professional success has been to occupy positions that people thought women couldn't occupy, such as becoming chairman of U.S. Century Bank, such as becoming the leader, the president of the #1 Hispanic advertising agency in the country. That has been a tremendous pleasure for me, to open roads so that other women could also occupy those positions in the future. My biggest professional failure, I really can't think of any. I'm satisfied with what I have done. I mean, I wish I were a billionaire so I could give as much money to needy organizations in the cultural community as Melinda Gates is giving right now. I think that would be a tremendous pleasure. That's my only failure, I think, has been not earning billions.
What you were not only the head of U.S. Commercial Bank, you were the only Cuban American woman chair of a U.S. Commercial Bank. Is that right?
Well, there was a woman before me who headed Continental Bank. She was the daughter of the owner who founded it. Her name is Jackie Dascal, and I believe she was the first one. And then Jackie sold her bank. So between 2019 and 2022, I was the only Cuban American woman to head a commercial community bank.
And you took that, and during your tenure, the bank went public.
And the bank went public, and that was a tremendous success story. Luis de la Aguilera, our CEO, and the investors, Patriot and Priam, and all the board did a great job with the team to bring that about, and we were so excited, and it was such a thrill to see our pictures in that huge digital board that appears on Times Square. That was incredible.
What do you think? What do you think are the lasting contributions that Cuban Americans have made to the community in the world, specifically in the South Florida community and broadly in the business community?
When Cuban exiles arrived in Miami, Miami was primarily a tourism destination, and it was really Miami Beach. The tall buildings in Miami were the Miami News Tower, which became El Refugio, and then later Freedom Tower, and the courthouse. Miami has become what it is because Cuban Americans had the vision to see the geography of Miami and to realize that their Spanish language capabilities and experience enabled them to create bridges to Latin America and to be able to sell goods and services to Latin America. They had that international mentality of creating Miami or transforming Miami into an international business and financial center, not only a tourism center. And I must say and give credit to Maurice Ferré, who worked very closely with Cubans in making this possible, and he supported Cuban businesses in making this possible. And he had the vision that Miami was a new world center. In fact, he really coined the phrase with the Downtown Development Authority of creating this whole concept of Miami becoming a new world center. And the dream, the reality has caught up to the dream. If you look at Miami and the many buildings that are tall in this community and the many businesses that have enriched this community, many of which are owned by Cuban Americans, you see very clearly what the legacy of the Cuban American community has been in the business world. When you look at the fact that 70% of the population of Miami is of Hispanic origin, that bilingualism and multiculturalism is a reality in the city with the arrival of the Haitian population and people from other countries. I think that by creating this very tolerant and multicultural atmosphere, we have also demonstrated to the United States that immigrants are a tremendous value to this country, that immigrants are what makes this country great, that we are all immigrants because nobody was here except the Native Americans, and we know what was done to these poor people. And these immigrants bring in a desire to succeed. They bring in the initiative, they bring in the desire to work, and only a minority is criminal. So we should never, ever destroy their image because they actually bring value. We all have brought value to the United States and especially to South Florida. The reason all these billionaires from New York and Chicago and other areas are coming to Miami, buying homes here and establishing their businesses here is because this is a safe, tolerant, internationally oriented, culturally rich, and fun environment to live in. And I believe that Cuban Americans had a lot to do with creating that.
Amazing. How are we for time?
We're at 4:15. I mean, at 14:15, 2:15.
2:50. I could have a few more minutes.
Does Aida need a break?
How you doing? Do you need a break?
Bring up my son
No, we're gonna get into this. This is why I'm trying.
and my granddaughter and my
You're gonna
husband.
You're gonna tell your
And
Patty?
the event of all the women.
Yeah. Okay. Just a new card.
It's coming out really good, Aida.
Thank you. Yeah, I got the immigrants.
Thank you.
In
Yes,
there.
That's very important.
That's so important.
Go ahead.
So I want you to think back in your agency years. Is there any particular advertising campaign, or more than one that is particularly memorable to you, or that you're particularly proud of?
I love the one of the ones that won the national TV Addy was a campaign that started with this spot featuring Teresa Maria Rojas, the actress, with Rubén Rabasa, and they are both a husband and wife team that is sitting on these portable chairs on the beach in Key Biscayne, and they're talking about dreaming what they would do if they won the Florida lottery. And this was the most incredibly funny and natural conversation. It was just wonderfully acted, wonderfully directed, and I'm very proud of that particular spot.
You left the advertising world right before it shifted a lot. I wonder if you could talk about that. This is around the early 2000s, and we know that the death of publishing, as we knew it, came, and the changing media landscape. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, just that time, and how that's changed, particularly for the Hispanic market and Hispanic consumers.
Right. In 2003, January 2004, when I left, television, radio, print was very important. So I think that after that, with the entry of e-marketing and social media, things started changing completely. And I think I must have a guardian angel who tells me when to leave certain places, because I think I would have had a tremendous frustration with some of the things that happened. And I think that I would have had to study a lot and do a lot of research to be able to cope with the changes that happened in the agency business. So, I was very fortunate that I left at that time.
What do you think from the professional, in the business world, where do you think, you represent somebody who's had a tremendous amount of success and influence in the world of Hispanic marketing. What are other areas where Cuban Americans have made a mark in the business world?
Well, I think, in the consumer area, in the banking area, in the building area, I mean, we have an organization dedicated to builders, Latin Business Association. It's incredible the variety of fields that Cubans have entered. For example, the most iconic restaurant that tourists visit here, Versalles. It started an incredible chain of Cuban restaurants, and Felipe Valls and his family created an empire. You even have Versalles and La Carreta in the Miami airport. You have supermarkets owned by Cubans, like the Herran family of Sedanos. You have Presidente Supermarket. You have the food industry. Café Bustelo was started by Cubans, Café Pilon. It's incredible. I mean, almost every field, architects. Willy Vermelho organized he's an architect. He organized an exhibition at the American Museum of the Cuban Diaspora on how Cuban architects have contributed to the beautiful development of South Florida. And it was amazing. The Freedom Tower, one of the architects involved in renovating the Freedom Tower was Raul Rodriguez, a Cuban American. I could go on and on. I mean, in every field. And then in culture, of course, Cuban Americans have won Pulitzers. They have won literary awards. Somebody like Daina Chaviano, who won the Florida Literary Award. Every field, Richard Blanco, our poet laureate. I could go into any field. Yesterday, for example, I met the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro, born in Havana, his family emigrated in 1962, went to New York. The guy is incredibly bilingual, very funny, has a Cuban sense of humor. All of the officers there absolutely love the guy. There's another Cuban by the last name of Martinez del Pinillo, who is now in charge of our Pacific Fleet in an area which is seeing a tremendous amount of danger coming from China. And a Cuban American is in charge of that. I could go on. I mean, it's the generation that in the first generation and the second generation has succeeded in every field. And I'm very proud of the Cuban exile community and the Cuban Americans that came afterwards.
Speaking of Cuban Americans that came afterwards and generations, you have a son who's a first generation American, Cuban American, and who's also an entrepreneur in a different field. So tell me about your son and your family.
I think my greatest success in life has been my son, my family, my husband, Fernando Petit, my son, Alex Fumero, and now my grandchild, Desi Fumero. And Alex is a producer in Hollywood, and he is deeply rooted in the Hispanic culture. For example, when he and you, Karim, created Mucho, Mucho Amor, The Legend of Walter Mercado. If you haven't seen it on Netflix, make sure you click on it, and many other projects that you have created. I was so proud of him because he delved into that Hispanic culture to come up with this idea of this documentary, which is amazing. And he honored someone who had a great culture and a great sense of humor, was an astrologer that was followed by millions of people in Latin America. So he was beyond Puerto Rico. He was followed by Cubans and Latin Americans all over the place. And he was a wonderful guy, very positive human being who had been abandoned, who had not been recognized. So what you all did for him, and what my son recently did, an incredible podcast with another very famous Cuban, Andy Garcia, who he's known since he was a boy. and he talked about how he got the Godfather position and what his experiences were as becoming the Godfather 3, a Cuban exile. He came here at the age of 5, I believe. All of these things make me very proud and very proud of my family. It's a thrill when your son is doing good work, positive work, when he lives a wonderful life with his wife Lizzie, with his daughter Desi in Los Angeles. And, you cannot get any luckier than that.
My last question for you kind of ties into your family and your. I have a granddaughter, Desi Fumero. At the time of this interview, not even a year old. In 2024. And here's you as an immigrant, and you as a business person, as a woman. You faced as a woman so much adversity, and yet achieved so many tremendous levels of success in business, in particular. What are the hopes for a granddaughter in a world that women have a bigger role in, but maybe not as much as it should be? I wonder what are for your Desi Fumero and the Desi Fumeros out there who are going to go out into the world as young women someday and make their mark. What are your advice for them?
My main goal is that they can become what they want to be without being put down, without having blocks and obstacles placed in their path, and that they can have the opportunity of realizing their dream, whether it is just to be a poet or an actor, or to be a painter, or to be a scientist, or to be the chairman of the board of a bank. It doesn't matter as long as it's their vocation that becomes a reality. And I hope that also in her private life, that she has the opportunity to be as healthy as she can be, to stay away always from drugs and alcohol, which is something very important that I hope that everyone who is listening to me and is young, don't ruin your life. Look at your body as a sacred receptacle. And I hope women follow that advice, because there is so much enjoyment and so much fulfillment you can have in life if you believe in yourself, you stay healthy, you stay within a disciplined, organized way of life, and you allow yourself to love and be loved.